from Ramen Studio. Now I'm coming to you for a second time. I've already recorded this video once, but there was an embarrassing amount of cat hair on my t-shirt. I can't imagine why. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about this. This is a guitar effects pedal that I made for a friend of mine, Sim. He plays in a math rock band named SEIMS. You may have heard of them. They're in the Guinness Book of Records for using every single note known to man in every single song. Sometimes all at the same time. Now, when Sim came to me with this, I was pretty excited. I'd always wanted to make a guitar pedal before. This is a pedal that can be used with a guitar or a bass, and it was made in conjunction with Dirty Sock effects. This went on to be super popular. Sim already sold out the first batch and a second batch of these pedals. But we can't go any further without learning what it sounds like. So, here's an example. I don't know where the lyrics come from.
Why haven't you paid my invoice? Why is my bank account the same? I asked you so politely, reminded you fortnightly. So why haven't you paid my invoice? Oh!
Definitely not some sort of deep-seated emotion. Alright, so for something like this, it's an interesting double challenge. You're working on an illustration, something that needs to work with the shape. You're kind of trying to solve a packaging design issue here too. A common thing with design is you think, cool, I'm going to do something really awesome, my mind's going to go wild, and there's no restrictions. The problem is, when you see the product, there often are a lot of restrictions. Something like this is a great example of the sort of restriction you'll find in a lot of the projects you do. For example, here we've got the dials that can't really move, an LED that can't move, and the button here to turn it on. With those elements in place, it means the artwork is going to have to fit around the elements that can't move. So then you're left with an interesting challenge. How do I use as much of the space as I can to communicate whatever my idea is and what the design looks like, while retaining all that information that needs to be there? For example, on a guitar pedal, you always need to label what the dials do. This poses an interesting challenge. With something like a pedal, you sort of assume that the end user knows a lot about what they're doing and will understand it pretty intuitively. But that sort of approach can be a bad idea. Sometimes you need to dumb things down and make sure your communication is as obvious as possible. With that in mind, we made sure to indicate where the audio goes in and where it goes out, though I think this is pretty standard on a normal pedal. When Sim came to me, he wanted to use his adorable cat Harry. Harry is a beautiful, beautiful Maine Coon cat and is gigantic. We sort of wanted to show how big and fluffy he is. In our original designs, we sort of thought we might lean on some of the illustration I'd done for SEIMS before. This was a drawing of Harry that ended up on a lot of their merch. But when we looked at putting that onto the pedal, it really didn't fit the shape of the pedal very well. So what could we do that made it interesting? Well, when it comes to a pedal, to turn it on, you often use your foot. You stomp down, and then the light will go on. For this, we thought, why not align it with Harry's nose? That way, when you're turning the pedal on, it's like you get to tap him on the nose. Adorable. There were also a few challenges here with the artworking process. We did the initial sketches here in Photoshop. In Photoshop, I like to draw things like this using the mirror tool, and I also like to use something like this sort of rough pencil-y brush. I find when you're doing this, rather than using a standard round brush, it gives your drawing a bit of character. I think sometimes when you show people sketches, they can assume that it's the final product. When you use something like a really clean brush to do an illustration, I think that's even harder for people to understand that your sketch is just a sketch and not the final artwork. So if there's a bit of texture in your sketch, I think that shows people this is just a sketch, this isn't the final piece. Moving forward, we decided that the brush actually gave a bit of texture to Harry. It sort of made him look like he was a bit furry without having to go in and draw all the hairs individually. Something like fur is something that often doesn't translate very well in Illustrator. If you're drawing all these hairs, it can look a bit messy, and they often end up with a really uniform shape, which can be quite distracting. So for the design itself, we wanted to keep it very simple. Harry's black and white, so that's a simple starting point, but he's got beautiful green eyes, and Sim wanted to incorporate two flowers. One is the peony, which is his wife's favorite flower, and the other is a frangipani, which is his daughter's favorite flower. So for this, we threw the peonies into the background to make a sort of pattern, and we decided to put the frangipani behind Harry's ear, as you'd often see people doing walking around Sydney. Once we'd decided on the design, the next step was to bring this into Illustrator. Here, I did something that I normally wouldn't advise to people, but for something like this, it actually works surprisingly well. I used the live trace feature and looked at some different options onto how we could bring that illustration to life as a vector. Now, Live Trace has come a really long way. I've been paying Adobe about $60 a month for about 10 years now, And finally, with that investment, they've worked out how to make live trace feature work. Sure, there's still that weird issue where a random bezier in the corner of your artboard gets selected every time you pick something else. And sure, they can't fix that after about 10 years of that bug existing, but now we have a decent live trace feature. And doesn't that make the $7,500 I've spent on Adobe all worth it in the end? So we decided to go with this version of live trace, and then we started to artwork this in Illustrator. And when you're artworking something like this in Illustrator, you'll often get a knife from the printer. This is normally a PDF or an EPS file, and it's normally layered with all the layers named. You'll have something like the artwork layer, the knife layer, and for something like this, you might even have a schematics layer. That just means that everyone that's working on the product is following the exact same measurements. Super handy if you've got something like this where everything needs to align. The knife in this layer indicates where things will be cut and where things will fit. This is something you see a lot in packaging design. The knife layer is what it sounds like. It can be used to create a knife to cut out elements in the design. Here you can indicate a lot of different things. Cuts that will go right through your packaging, perforations, so you've got a small amount of a cut, and even scoring, which can be used to fold items. If you're ever creating something like this, your printer will probably have a few specifications that they want you to follow. The easiest thing to do is draw your paths, create a new swatch, set it to a specific color that's not used elsewhere in your design. Very commonly, you see this as 100% magenta. Then you set that to a spot color and name the spot color knife. Make sure your knife is always on a separate layer, and your printer will always be able to access this layer themselves and see it in Acrobat. So another thing with these sort of designs that's interesting is your design is being screened onto the item. So the way that works is anything that you're going to be printing on here sort of needs a supporting background color. So for example, the peonies are very fragile in the background. It's simple line art, it shows through in red. When you're creating something like this though, you need to provide the printer two separate layers. One layer is sort of the background for your print. In this case, we simply had a white background. This means that when you print over the top, there won't be any transparency in your layer. If you were to print without that, something like the pink in this might show through. So when you provide that artwork to the printer, you'll be providing them two separate layers. One is titled background and one is titled artwork. Often you send these through as just 100% black layers so the printer can see them, even if you send them through as two separate PDF files. These will always need to be aligned. Make sure your background artwork is just a copy of your artwork layer. Go in, use the Pathfinder tool, and add everything together. This makes sure that the design you're applying is going to be exactly the same as the layer above it. Another big thing with these artworks is most printers will ask for you to flatten the transparencies. This is a pretty simple procedure, but it's actually quite essential for a lot of printers. If this is something that your printer needs, normally they'll tell you. Because a vector is just these two separate numbers, it's not actually being plotted directly as pixels. So when you flatten transparencies, you're converting this vector path into actual pixels. This is really helpful if you're making something like a screen that's being screen printed, because that's actually made up of dots. It's something you don't see until you're up close, but it makes sense. The ink needs to get through the screen. You'll find that most packaging you provide to printers will require this flattening of transparencies. It can make the file a lot more complex and make it a lot harder for it to render, but this is something that the printer will deal with on their end. Obviously, printing is a magical dark art, and designers will never understand how it works. The same way that after running a business for 5 years, I still don't entirely understand how tax works. And so I pay someone else to tell me how I think tax works, which is great. So there you have it. A beautiful pedal made with a beautiful cat for an okay friend. If you're out there and you want to create a pedal, why not get in touch? I'm always interested in working on fun products and I like working with nice people. So if you're a jerk, stay away. I've got it covered. Also, if you're out there and you've done something similar and you're looking for some feedback on your work, feel free to send me an email. I'm keen to see what you guys make and I'd love to talk through some of the projects of people that are watching this channel. Anyway, thank you so much for watching the video. I need to go now as my cat is starting to bang the microphone around, but I'll see you again soon.